Good evening and welcome to NTD News. Here's today's top stories. The U.S. continues to see signs that the nation will soon start recovering. Some states are even beginning to take steps towards reopening. After the CDC changed guidelines on how to count CCP virus deaths, one state senator, a qualified doctor, is raising concerns. China's economy shrinks for the first time since records began 3 decades ago. Its GDP falling nearly 7%. Apple stock gets downgraded. Ford says it's shoring up its cash reserves, and Airbus makes plans to furlough thousands of workers. And the movie industry is hit hard by shutdowns. Theaters are losing revenue, and films have been put off until next year. Thanks for joining us. An update on the virus situation in the United States. Around 700,000 Americans are now confirmed to have the virus, with more than 34,000 deaths in total. But nearly 60,000 people have recovered, and there are signs the country overall is improving. Many states now mapping out plans for reopening, with some starting as early as today. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the latest.
Trump offered guidance on a phased approach to reopening yesterday.
Where nearly 30% of our country have reported no new cases in the last 7 days.
But he says the final decision is still each state's to make. Some states are wasting no time in making those decisions. Jacksonville, Florida reopened its parks and beaches today, but people still need to follow social distancing. Texas is set to open their retail stores and state parks next week.
I have formed a statewide strike force to open Texas.
But some states aren't quite ready. For one, Mississippi extended its stay-at-home order.
One more week of vigilance. One more week of sheltering in place. It's working.
Ohio will start reopening on May 1st. Michigan's governor said she's hopeful the state can reopen by May 1st, too, as they've seen fewer new cases lately. Michigan residents are eager, and some have been protesting, urging the governor to reopen sooner. There are ongoing protests in a handful of other states, too. Even as more states start easing restrictions, reopening in most states doesn't include schools. According to an Education Week report, over half of U.S. states have either ordered or recommended schools stay closed for the rest of the academic year. Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
And a group of states in the Midwest is the latest to join forces for reopening. That makes 3 state-level partnerships, one in the Midwest, one on the East Coast, and one on the West Coast. And New York is seeing another drop in total hospitalizations. It's a good sign, but the governor said he'll need more help from the federal government to open the state. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more.
Total hospitalizations are down in New York State, and as of Friday, over 218,000 have tested positive and over 10,900 have died from the CCP virus. Governor Cuomo laid out steps to open the state up. Large-scale testing and money rank high, things he said they don't have enough of. So Cuomo is asking the federal government for funding.
The federal government cannot wipe their hands of this and say, oh, the states are responsible for testing. We cannot do it. We cannot do it without federal help.
Because tax revenue is plummeting, he said the state would need $10 to $15 billion to ramp up its virus testing. But President Trump said on Thursday that there are enough tests to go around.
As Dr. Birx has been advising our governors for weeks, we continue to have an excess testing capacity of 1 million tests per week available for use, and our capabilities are growing every single day, especially with the new tests that are coming onto the market rapidly.
Cuomo is also calling for funding from the federal government to help pay for the state's public services. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
And a Minnesota state senator and doctor expresses his concerns about the new CDC guidelines for counting deaths. He said physicians don't like it when politicians try to influence patient care. The CDC says local health departments should start counting deaths in 2 categories, confirmed and probable. That's the reason New York City's death count nearly doubled this week. Wyoming and Ohio yesterday also began counting probable deaths. Senator Dr. Scott Jensen said hospitals also have an incentive to do so. They could nearly triple the funding for seeing patients who have the CCP virus. And there's a chorus of calls for a review of the World Health Organization. Leaders of G7 nations and Republican lawmakers agree WHO mishandled the CCP virus.
The White House said in a statement that leaders of the G7 nations called for a thorough review and reform of the World Health Organization. President Trump led a video conference with the G7 leaders on Thursday, their first meeting in a month. The video conference was held to discuss plans for each nation's recovery. According to the White House, much of the conversation centered on the lack of transparency and chronic mismanagement of the pandemic by the WHO. Following President Trump's criticism of the WHO this week, Republican lawmakers suggested that the UN agency's Director General should resign. 17 Republicans on the House's Foreign Affairs Committee wrote a letter supporting the halt of U.S. funding to the WHO. They wrote that funding should not resume until Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus resigns. In the letter, the 17 congressmen said they had lost faith in Tedros. They said they blamed the Chinese Communist Party and the WHO for mishandling the epidemic that led to a global pandemic. President Trump said previously the WHO has promoted China's disinformation about the CCP virus. What's more, also on Thursday, a group of 8 Senate Republicans called for an international investigation into the organization and the origins of the virus.
The Japanese Prime Minister agreeing today. He says there are issues with the WHO and Japan will review its funding after the pandemic. And in other news, the movie industry is taking a big hit from the shutdowns. The box office seeing a 25% drop in revenue since the start of the year. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
The pandemic is ravaging the film industry. Theaters are closed and movie production is halted. Reports predict this year's box office sales could fall over 40% compared to last year. Film marketing CEO Mark Becker tells us how the change is affecting him.
So how would that affect people like you in your profession?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, there's obviously, it's no doubt that box office is going to be off this year. I mean, if you look at, a year ago, last weekend, I think the box office did a couple $100 million. This weekend, it did less than $5,000 or around there. I mean, of course, we're definitely seeing a slowdown from some of our clients. There's not just uncertainty with the box office, but also uncertainty about their jobs. Disney, for example, if you're seeing the layoffs, or a lot of the agencies across the industry.
Disney's market cap dropped over $60 billion, or 25%, since mid-February. The company has had to furlough many employees that work for its movie companies, including Marvel and Pixar. And AMC lost 70% of its stock value since the start of the year. Chinese conglomerate Dalian Wanda took the company over in 2012 in a $2.6 billion deal. Wanda's theaters in China are still closed amid the outbreak. The word on Wall Street is that AMC Theaters may be headed towards bankruptcy, with some analysts saying it might not survive the shutdowns caused by the pandemic. The brand marketing expert says movie theaters may need to come up with some new ideas like virtual reality or a more immersive experience to stay in business once the lockdowns are lifted. Meanwhile, viewership on streaming sites like Netflix are on the rise. And what about platforms like Netflix? Have they seen a surge in their viewership?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I'm not privy to. Netflix isn't too open about sharing their data, but streamers have seen a huge boost. I mean, Disney Plus just passed 50 million subscribers, and they're absolutely blowing past their projections, which is phenomenal. Netflix is whether it's Tiger King fever or any of the other stories on their platform.
Becker says film companies are struggling to get people into theaters already, and the pandemic is making it worse. This as we enter the new normal and the economy progressively reopens. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
And Americans have started getting their stimulus payments. The money is meant to soothe the economic impact from the CCP virus. Here's what some are planning to do with the extra funds.
When Mark Grimaldi saw $2,400 in relief payment deposited into his bank account, the retiree knew immediately how he would spend it. The payment for he and his wife came in on Wednesday morning.
It's because I had filed tax returns in 18 and 19 years and had direct deposit for federal or state refunds. I was already set up.
He talked about what he might use the money for.
It's called a stimulus, check, which means that, it leads me to believe we should go out and spend it somewhere to keep the economy going, which, may eventually happen. But for right now, we're going to hold it in abeyance and keep that back for, something more pressing like mortgage or, something that is unforeseen in the next several months.
The economic impact payments are being issued under the $2.3 trillion CARES Act. It was passed by Congress last month to help Americans survive the economic impact of the CCP virus pandemic. Some stimulus recipients are using the money to help others.
So I have a few friends that were working in the service industry in restaurants and bars who are currently out of work. So I spoke with them yesterday and offered to help out if they needed it. So that's kind of my first thing. And then whatever I have left over, I'm going to probably pay towards my student loan debt that I have from undergrad.
According to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, 80 million Americans would have received their payment by Wednesday. Paper checks will be sent out next week to people who don't use direct deposit.
And then our business roundup, Goldman Sachs downgrades Apple stock. This as Ford records a $2 billion loss for the first quarter.
Goldman Sachs said it expects iPhone shipments to drop 36% during the current quarter. CCP virus-related lockdowns around the world have impeded business. The company downgraded Apple stock. Apple shares fell 1.6% to $282.13 on Friday morning. Ford Motor said it would tap debt markets to shore up its cash reserves. The company lost about $2 billion in the first quarter, while U.S. sales of its vehicles dropped 12.5%. Airbus will furlough some 3,000 French aerospace workers. A French union said this represented 20% of the Airbus workforce in France. Airbus also announced plans to cut jetliner production by at least a third. 1 million doses of a potential CCP virus vaccine are already being manufactured. The vaccine is being developed by British scientists. They have not yet conducted trials to prove it is effective, but the company will still have the doses ready by September.
And news from around the world as an expert predicts total UK debts and the Italian economy worsens.
A public health expert in the UK says the country might suffer over 40,000 casualties by the time the pandemic is over. According to him, the government was too slow in imposing measures to prevent its spread. This as Britain recently extended its lockdown for another 3 weeks. As the Italian economy gets worse, people are seen waiting for local food handouts. Organized by charities, the service is usually reserved for the homeless and poorest members of the community. The people in line described themselves as being destroyed and said they wouldn't know where to find food if it wasn't for the charity. Europe's largest economy is also facing hard times. Germany's economy minister said the country is facing its most grave economic situation since World War II. The French army reported that the virus has found its way onto an aircraft carrier. Almost 50% of the staff who were deployed on the military vessel tested positive. And East African countries are fighting a war on 2 fronts. Efforts to contain a second locust invasion are in full force, despite restrictions on movement of personnel and equipment due to the virus. The desert locust is considered the most destructive migratory pest in the world. Around 20 million people are already experiencing acute food insecurity.
And still to come, China's economy shrinks for the first time since records began 3 decades ago. Its GDP falling by nearly 7%. That and more when we return.
% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. This is a battle between truth and deceit. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Welcome back. While global stocks jumped today as the U.S. gets closer to reopening, China's economy is facing a record slowdown. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has the details.
China's economy shrinks for the first time since record began 3 decades ago. Its GDP fell almost 7% in the first quarter. Factories across China shut down and exports fell. Many countries reevaluating their trading relationship with China. Even though Chinese authorities are urging companies to reopen, many analysts believe economic activity will remain low. An American economist tweeting China's GDP figures show a depression rate of economic collapse. Chinese authorities are trying everything to get companies back to work, but many factories have no orders and many people have been laid off. One factory needed 50 new workers. 500 turned up for the interview. Since the beginning of 2020, over 5,000 movie and TV companies in China have closed down. That's an 80% increase versus the same time in 2019. 6 cities in China are considered potential hotspots for the next outbreak, but the people in these 6 cities may not know it themselves. According to photos from Chinese social media, at one airport in southern China, people arriving from Wuhan or 5 other specific cities were told to take a different route than other passengers. On 2 airport arrival forms, passengers are asked if they are coming from the 6 places mentioned above. One of the 6 cities is Guangzhou. One resident writing, "I only found out Guangzhou was a hotspot after reading chat room posts. The control measures are still very loose here. Many people don't even wear face masks anymore. Most people here don't know the situation is so serious. None of my colleagues know." China's Global Times editor-in-chief boasted on Chinese social media that he mocked U.S. officials on Twitter. This comes after U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper on Thursday questioned the information coming out of China. Hu Xijing wrote on Weibo that he mocked Esper, saying only 7 people died in Shanghai, which neighbors Wuhan, while more than 10,000 people have died in New York on the other side of the world. But instead of getting praise, he came under attack. Many netizens asked how come he had access to Twitter when the rest of China does not, adding Chinese authorities should allow everyone in China to use it.
A Hubei resident is suing the Chinese regime for its role in the pandemic. It's the first known case of this in China and has caught the attention of authorities. NTD's Sherwin Rong has the details.
A Hubei resident says the government knew the virus could be passed between humans long before it announced it. The cover-up resulting in many lost lives.
Someone needs to take responsibility for this epidemic. It's a very serious matter. As a Hubei citizen, I think it's necessary to stand up and tell the Hubei provincial government to take responsibility.
Tan Jun works for a theme park in Hubei. On the morning of April 13th, he filed a complaint against the Hubei provincial government. He became the first person in China to file a lawsuit against the government for the spread of the CCP virus. In his complaints, he said, according to the state-issued investigation report of Li Wenliang case, human-to-human transmission had occurred by December 2019. However, Hubei Health Commission stated on January 11, 2020, no medical personnel found infected. No clear evidence for human-to-human transmission. They obviously downplayed the situation. He added the Hubei government's cover-up led to the fast spread of the virus, which overwhelmed hospitals and ICUs. Many patients didn't have a chance to get diagnosed or treated. Many people died, including a lot of medical staff. Ultimately, the entire province was locked down. The loss of human lives and economy is unprecedented. The complaint states 2 demands. First, the Hubei provincial government must make an apology in the Hubei daily newspaper. Second, the defendant, the provincial government, pays all legal costs. Many Hubei residents support him. However, they are not optimistic about whether he can succeed.
Everyone should stand up. Every local government should take responsibility. Not just Hubei province, but the entire Chinese government should take responsibility. Of course we support the lawsuit. The problem is that the government doesn't care. In other countries, you can sue the government. But how's that possible in China? The police will come looking for you.
The police summoned Tan Jun the night he filed the lawsuit. They told him to write a letter promising not to post anything related to the lawsuit online. And it's not just in China. Countries around the world are now calling out the Chinese regime for its role in the pandemic. A UK-based think tank advising countries to take legal action against the CCP for its cover-up. On April 3rd, a U.S. congressman introduced a bill that would make it easier for Americans to take legal action on their own. Reporting by Yuning and Shuwenrong, NTD News.
Up next, a father in China has designed an inflatable suit to protect his 2-year-old son from the CCP virus. See how he looks after the break.
Are you tired of newspapers spinning the truth and pushing false narratives? And are you looking for honest coverage of Spygate, the true story of collusion? Or the truth behind the crisis at our southern border? Or how the Chinese Communist Party is working to subvert America and our way of life? Then you need to check out the Epoch Times newspaper. It's independent, nonpartisan, and it doesn't push any political agendas. Just go to readepoch.com and try it yourself for a full month for just $1. You'll absolutely love it.
Luxury Italian car maker Ferrari has started making parts to convert Snorkel masks into respirators. The company hopes it can meet the demand for respirators during the virus pandemic. Italian engineers deserve credit for thinking of Snorkel masks as potential respirators. Italian car company Ferrari is now making thermoplastic valves and fittings for the masks, using its 3D printing technology. Several other countries are following Italy's lead. Ferrari hopes the equipment can be used in Italian hospitals and by its healthcare workers. And with students attending class remotely, many different environments have now become classrooms. One young boy in Italy studies amid particularly unusual surroundings.
With schools in Italy closed, many students are turning to online classes to keep up with their education. But online classes do require an internet connection, something a 12-year-old Italian boy living in Tuscany's countryside doesn't have at home. Giulio, who doesn't want to miss out on his education, has found a solution. Every day, Giulio and his mother drive to the middle of nowhere, to a certain spot on a hill under a tree. There, his mother's phone gets just enough signal to act as a router for their tablet. With it, he can access the classroom app and continue with his studies.
On the days when I have lessons, I bring from home a table, a stool and my bag with a tablet and all the books that I need. And then my mom and I come up here with the car. We set everything up and we are ready for our lessons.
Out in the open field, it's not the same as within the walls of a living room. Studying under the Italian sun may be beautiful, but it can also be distracting at times.
Most of the time I can concentrate well, but it also happens that I'm talking and you can hear the bleating of a goat behind me.
But Giulio won't study outside forever. His family's home internet is already being fixed, and he'll soon return to attending his online classes from his living room, like his fellow students.
And then another story of dedicated parenting. A father in Shanghai, China, has taken a creative and adorable approach to keeping his toddler safe. He designed an inflatable suit for his 2-year-old son, meant to fend off the virus. It was not yet clear whether it's effective or not.
Under different circumstances, it would appear that this family dressed up their toddler as an astronaut for the day, even mimicking the conditions of low gravity. But actually, it's a protection suit made to keep him safe from virus infection.
I hope my son can wear it amid the epidemic, and I hope to provide him with total protection in isolation.
Tao, the boy's father, designed the suit himself. He ordered the inflatable suit online and then added some modifications, including a filter and a device that monitors air. People passing by adore the look.
I think it's great. He looks like a cartoon character.
But some express doubt that the suit works.
It's cute for sure, but I'm not sure how the filter works and if it really can offer protection.
Besides filtering air, Tao says that the suit will also prevent his son from touching his face, which could lead to pathogens entering the body.
And coming up, real astronauts returning from space are in for a surprise. It's not the same Earth they left 200 days ago, and lockdowns have even shifted their usual landing place. Find out more when we return. Welcome back. Earth will feel like a very different place for the latest crew returning from the International Space Station. For the two NASA astronauts, the journey back appears to have been the easy part.
I'll see each other next.
The long trip home from space for these returning astronauts has just got a little longer. It's a very different Earth they come back to, given the lockdown rules in place around the world. After 205 days in space on the International Space Station, NASA astronauts Andrew Morgan and Jessica Mir, as well as their Russian cosmonaut counterparts, landed in the Kazakhstan desert on Friday and now face a detour to ensure they get to their final destinations. Travel restrictions throughout the country meant search and rescue teams could not set up base as usual, and so the crew of the Soyuz MS-15 spacecraft will head to a Russian-owned spaceport after being extracted from the capsule. The journey isn't done there either. The US astronauts will then take a 186-mile drive to the city of Kozloduy, where they will board a NASA aircraft to finally take them home. But when they've completed 3,280 orbits of Earth and a total trip of 86.9 million miles, a little further to get home probably won't bother them too much.
This might be surprising, but getting zoo animals to stay still on a scale takes a lot of patience. To make things easier, this zoo in London disguised their scale as a bridge to help weigh their 76 penguins. The bridge/beam balance is made of reusable materials found from around the zoo. It was strategically placed so the penguins are weighed each time they go to and from home for food. The zoo's staff saying weighing animals regularly is an important part of keeping tabs on its health. The ZSL London Zoo is currently reaching out to the public for help to care for its 18,000 animals, while it's closed off to visitors. And that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Paul Graney.